Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. Today we are speaking with Mr. David Rodriguez about the American public school system. Mr. Rodriguez is the publisher of The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto and serves as Mr. Gatto's agent. He is the founder of the Education Options Expo and the creator of homeschoolleader.com. You can follow his work at homeschoolleader.com and at educationoptionsexpo.org. You can follow Mr. Gatto's work at johntaylorgatto.com. You can find Mr. Rodriguez on Facebook by typing in Fortune Focused, that's Fortune Focused past tense, at yahoo.com, and on Twitter at DJ Rodriguez 2015. For more information, please see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/public-schools. David, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be with you, Adam. I think this is a very important topic, and I'm very happy to discuss it with you and your audience.
Well, wonderful. Yeah, I'm happy to have you here. So I mentioned John Taylor Gatto a few times in the intro, and I assume his name is going to come up over the course of the interview. So can you just get started by giving a brief sense of who Mr. Gatto is and why his work is so significant?
Sure. John Taylor Gatto is probably the most credible voice in the world of education today because he is not connected to some huge corporate entity, some huge foundation that, pays his way. And he is famous for becoming the state teacher of the year in New York by the education department at University of New York and also by Encyclopedia Britannica. So he's actually a two-time state teacher of the year. He's a three-time New York City teacher of the year. And the reason is because he just achieved so much in his classroom, and for an inner city student class, they're not supposed to achieve, quote, these great achievements, winning essay contests, doing various achievements. And so he achieved these great things, and then he comes out in the Wall Street Journal and says he's quitting schooling because he's tired of hurting kids for his living, for his livelihood. And this was such a shocking breakthrough because people feel something wrong in the school system. He came out, and the story of his educational career is that he became a teacher by accident, becoming a substitute teacher in the beginning. And then he was so baffled about how the school would not let these kids learn. There's such a rigid structure. And so that started his journey on the path of exploring and discovering what is this institution about. And even now, if you get a chance to ask him, I'm still looking for answers, right? And he's put together a pretty good mosaic of the situation and, made some pretty clear conclusions and backed it up with some evidence. So yeah, that's his claim, is that he's just a regular 8th grade teacher, but he came out and did some rigorous research, and then he became world famous for speaking around the globe on the state of education and, speaking in many countries and letting people know, because the school system is the main form of social control. And he had to discover that for himself before he made that conclusion. So he's just a huge inspiration to homeschoolers worldwide, alternative educators, even traditional teachers who are looking for answers. And he's the only one who had the courage to come out and speak. And perhaps because he was at the end of his career and with all these accolades, that's what he was doing. So he's the guy who kind of opened Pandora's box to the reality of the school system, and now there's a handful of folks who are doing the same thing to get the message out.
All right, so you mentioned in there that the American public school system is a form of social control, and you mentioned Mr. Gatto's discussing how the public schools harm children. So I want to get to that in a little bit, but first I want to look at how we got to this point. So let's go back even before public schools were established, or at least the public school system as we know it today started coming into form. What did schools look like before public schools came into existence, and what was the quality of education like in that pre-public school era?
Well, pre-public school, I should say pre-forced attendance laws of 1852, beginning in Boston, Massachusetts, it was voluntary. In fact, there was other systems which tried to mandate compulsory education or compulsory attendance, but they didn't have the teeth to enforce it. as they did with bayonet and, literally the police were walking the kids to school when it first began. But before that, you're looking at a voluntary type model. And of course, there's the little red schoolhouse or the one-room schoolhouse, and a variety of ages would get together. And you also have the apprentice model, where you would learn a trade under somebody, but it was never compulsory. So you had a variety of choices where students, even back as far as Rome or like medieval times, where you would learn a trade or you would learn under somebody, a writer or someone who's like a blacksmith or a cobbler, these types of various professions, and you could learn as you were elected, or you could choose. And I guess the breakthrough with the United States is that it was a free country. There wasn't all this structure, when people came over in 1600s. So you just learned on the job. You just learned as you were going, versus the strict class system in Europe where you're either a peasant or you're a lord. And, there's those two distinct classes, and you're kind of where you're born. This is where you stay. And if you're, managing people in the elite level, then that's where your generational inheritance would go, and you could maintain that. And so with the 13 colonies and the United States of America, eventually you had a huge middle class, where if you put yourself to work and decided on what you wanted to do, you could do that. So the short answer is that there was choice and there was some options. And if your family needed you on the farm for 6 months out of the year, or 8-10 months out of the year, you were there, you were doing that. Whereas the compulsory model now mandates and began mandating attendance, and so the responsibility now goes to the state versus the parents and the student. And so when you're not able to self-direct or choose your own path, you lose that independent mind and independent will and say, this is my life. And now someone else is determining, what you're learning. And, that's kind of the essence of it, is that the compulsory model is probably the most detrimental part of the system, because now it's, if you don't put your kids in school, you can be fined or go to jail yourself. So yeah, before the compulsory model, there was choice, and there's even choice now, but just the mass of people don't know about it. And so, that's why we're having this conversation, to help get the word out.
Yeah, definitely. So how educated were the American people? I know it's hard to take everyone living in the U.S. as a block, but how educated were Americans in these pre-compulsory model days?
Yeah, the literacy rates, some estimate as high as 98%, even 96% in some historical revisions, like Alexander de Tocqueville. This is in the 1800s, late 1800s, where he's mentioning that these Yankees, these pioneers, these people out there on the range were very literate. And so that's the reason, is that they were actually allowed to read. They were given, most of the people were, Christians or out here for religious freedom. They didn't want the state control there in Europe. And so they came out here and they were just allowed to read. And so since reading is the foundation of intellectual mind and being able to think clearly and communicate, this is the way they're able to determine how educated the population is. And yeah, the very high literacy rates. And whereas now, I think I saw that the 1 out of 3 adults has a literacy rate below a 5th grade level. And so the literacy rate has gone down drastically over the last 200 years. In fact, the little pamphlet that helped spark the American Revolution was Common Sense by Thomas Paine. And this is it's a short read, but it's now studied at college courses and even graduate programs, whereas that little pamphlet sold, I think, over 600,000 copies in a population of about 3 million people. And this is, at a time where there were no compulsory schools and mandates to attend and learn, but people wanted to learn. And I think this is what your audience and parents worldwide should understand, is that we as humans, we have a deep need to learn. And so when we are given the freedom and just the support from family and people around us, we want to learn. So these folks, that's what they wanted to do. They got their religious freedom and they're building their communities and having a good life. That's the American dream, is having liberty, is having the independence and freedom versus, of course, people want to make some money. This is fine too. Let's make some money. But the dream is to be free. The dream is to create your own life, create your own destiny. And when you're literate, it helps it in a very significant way. And the people were very educated in terms of being able to have intellectual dialogue and debate and philosophical discussion at the dinner table and talking about all these big ideas. And so when you're given the freedom to choose your books and to talk about the big ideas, the philosophy, the foundation, and you have people around you that care, you can get very literate and educate yourself. And that's what John Gatto says is education. He said, education can't be done to you. Education is what you do to yourself, and you teach yourself. And that's what the early settlers and pioneers were able to do.
So who were some of the key figures and groups in bringing about a compulsory schooling system? There
are a lot of names, and the poster child would be Horace Mann there in Massachusetts, and he was a very ambitious politician, but behind the scenes you have people who are looking to control and manage society, and it can go back even as far as Hegel. And George Hegel's from Germany. You have Wilhelm Wundt in Germany also. This is in the late 1800s. And you have the Peabody family, the Vanderbilt family, later on the Rockefellers, the Carnegies. And from an academic standpoint, they're utopians, right? Darwin, Galton, these guys are thinking how to separate the elite from the underclasses. And the challenge they have is they didn't have the resources, right? This is all just an idea. This is a great idea. How do you put it together? And when you bring capital into play, and mainly the coal, the oil industry, and mass manufacturing, now these guys got the money to do it, and they also have the desire to do it as well, because they need a handful of people that are going to be sitting in their factories or going into their mines or wherever their source of or place of labor might be. This is what they need. They need people who are not going to talk back to the managers. They're just going to obey. And so it was a kind of a win-win between big corporations and government, as it turned out. And so that's what they're able to do. And then, it goes all the way up. You can go through William Torrey Harris. He's the first commissioner of the Education Department. You have Elwood Cubberley out of Columbia's Teacher College, who ended up becoming the Dean of Education at Stanford. You have Alexander Inglis, that's Inglis, who was the renowned professor at Harvard as well. The honors lecture in education is named after him. In fact, Inglis and Cubberley were both editors for Houghton Mifflin, and Houghton Mifflin had a monopoly on the book publishing game. And so Inglis was the secondary school editor, and Cubberley was the elementary school publisher, or editor rather, and they're the ones who are editing all the textbooks, and they're coming from Columbia's Teacher College, which was funded by Rockefeller. And so they're it's kind of this little group of people, and that's, well, the Teachers College is another topic, but that's how you're able to control the students, is you control the teaching of the teachers. So those are a few names, and it's there's a wide array of people that want to control children for the benefit of their corporate interests and their social order that they have in mind. And even going into the 20th century, you have John Dewey and you have B.F. Skinner, who is a behavior scientist. And it's really unbelievable. When you go down the rabbit hole fully, you can search some of those names and get into some of the details yourself. But these folks explicitly say, and I'll give you the 1906 quote from Elwood Cubberley that said, "In the future, schools will shape children, shape and form children like nails. And this is where we get the term human resources. They don't see you or your kids as a sovereign being, a spirit, a gift of God, however you want to express yourself. They see you as a resource. They see you as a piece of wood, as a piece of metal. And it's just totally disrespectful. And so that's why we got to get out there and promote some of the solutions, I think, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, we'll get to the solutions in a bit. Now, you mentioned Horace Mann in there, and then you also mentioned big business in there. And I want you to elaborate on who Horace Mann was and what role he played, as well as how big business played a role and what sorts of crony interests were involved and what they sought from being involved in establishing a compulsory education system.
Sure. Horace Mann is a guy out of Massachusetts, and he really didn't have any interest personally in establishing the compulsory school laws, but he was asked to take on this role, and he would be given a seat in Congress for it. So he took it on and ended up going to Prussia, which is a state in northern Germany, because this is where they had been successful with the compulsory education laws. And he went there and said that he saw, great order and just a great school system. And in fact, when he went over to Prussia, they were out of school sessions was out. There was no school in session. So this is all a kind of a figment of his imagination and what he saw, but they just knew that the schools were allowing order to take place, and there was great response from the military, because Prussia was a military state, and they would they would rent out their soldiers, kind of like a mercenary type economy. And so he went out there and came back, and now he started the Boston school committee, and I believe they had that going for about 8 years. It could be less than that, but they have the Boston School Minutes, and your library probably be able to pull that up, where they go through and they talk about, we want to get rid of the imagination of the students and not allow an independent mind. They should be part of the social hive mind, and this is what they said. So this is where Horace Mann came into play, and then the corporate interests. So the discoveries of whether the steam engine or coal-powered technology, you need people to run these machines. So if you have a mainly agrarian society where kids are on the farm and not in the urban areas, you need to bring them into the urban areas, and schools allow that to occur. And so when you bring the kids in from the kind of free range of the farm, where it's self-directed and you got to have initiative and your own independent mind, you put them into a classroom, learn obedience training, then they can graduate whenever they are graduating, 14, 16 years old, 18 years old eventually, and now they're ready to be placed in a factory where you sit and you turn the knobs and bang the hammer, and that's the extent of your labor. And they don't want the creative mind, the creative genius that is inside of all of us to break out and begin to express itself and, pursue our own goals, pursue our own dreams, and so they want to be part of these kids, be part of their corporate structure, and they can just sit at their office and collect, the overrides of the youth. But from a corporate standpoint, that's what you want. You don't want people who are going to disagree with your directives, and that's what makes management easy. One of the components that Gatto talks about heavily is the extension of childhood. And this is Johann Pestalozzi, who talked about the use of games and kind of playful ways to make kids childish, because childish people are easier to manage. And so, again, that's from the philosophical standpoint, but there was never a mechanism which would allow them to be in the classroom. And this is, again, where the word kindergarten comes from Frederick Froebel's. And word kindergarten comes from literally a garden of kids, raising kids like you're raising some crops. And when the population is mainly childish and just entertained with things which aren't relevant to their life, then they're easier to maintain. And this is why so many of the kids today, are, just not, in a place to have an independent livelihood. They just want to outsource their thinking and let someone else determine the outcome of their life. And as a younger person, if you're given a chance to consider philosophy and life and its meaning and where do we come from, where are we going, these are the big questions. If you start asking a 6-year-old or 8-year-old or 10-year-old who is not in the system, they'll have some ideas. But if after 12, 13, 14, 16, 18, there's so much conditioning, you're not even interested in this stuff anymore. Now it's just like, just tell me what to do, give me an assignment, and I'll do it. And so this, from a corporate standpoint, this is completely logical what they did, because it makes it easier to manage. And so that's how they're able to sell it, is that, look, here's how it's going to benefit your large corporate interests, as it was in Great Britain. They have huge corporate entities, and now the United States at that point had a bunch of independent livelihoods. And so they had to rein into Yankee entrepreneurialism and put it into more of a corporate structure. And so that's what they did. They made it easy for managers, and Horace Mann got his seat in Congress, as a politician would, and the the deal is on still today. So we're seeing the effects of it.
Right, and I'm so glad that you discussed Prussia during your answer on Horace Mann, because most people in the U.S. probably have never even heard of Prussia, let alone know anything about the Prussian school system from the 1800s. But the Prussian school system really served as a model in many ways for the American public school system. And it's so important to bring that up and to talk about the role that obedience, making soldiers obey, making children obey, making other people obey in that Prussian model applied when the American model was established. So what role did the Prussian school system play in helping to establish the model that was then brought to the United States?
Right. So compulsory schooling had not been achieved until Prussia achieved that. So this was the model, as mentioned. Horace Mann came over there. So how did Prussia do it? Well, Prussia was a military type economy, and in 1806, this is a key point, where a key battle, in fact, where Napoleon defeated the Prussian army. And long story short, one of the key philosophers of the day, Johann Fichte, that's Fichte, made his addresses to the German nation. That was the name of the series of his talks publicly. And he said, we have to get rid of this thing called imagination. We can't let them have their free will, because that's why we lost this battle, because the officers are given the orders, and you have all this imagination is rampant, in the soldiers' minds. So we have to get rid of it. And this is what he said expressively. And so that was the beginning of it. And then they started to create the how-to to make that work. And that was the beginning of the process. So that was the model that was successful. And then the U.S. copied that. And then you had other nations coming to copy it, because naturally the state has its own interests, and you are their interests, right? Your productivity are its interests. We're paying 30% taxes estimated, so they have to maintain that. Now you multiply that by 100 million people in the U.S. who pay taxes. It's a lot of money, so it's a lot of control. So even back then, you have tax collectors, and same situation. So they want to maintain that. They want to maintain their dominance, and with schooling, they're able to do that and utilize control over the students' minds and what's proper and what's accepted. And one of the great teachers, who was not related to the past, but now his name is Bob Proctor. He mentions how the child is pure subconscious mind up until about age 7 years old, meaning whatever you tell the child, they will accept. So if you say, hey, this is the greatest nation on earth, the president or whoever's the leader of the country is your father, like they did in Germany, the fatherland, kids accept it. So they got wind of that there in Prussia and started implementing that and just indoctrinating the kids with nationalism and how great their country is, and that makes it effective as they become older. And now they have allegiance to their nation, and that benefits the nation, whereas benefiting the family. And that was always the challenge too for these utopians, is the family. The parents want to get involved naturally with their kids, and so if you can remove the kids from the home and begin to indoctrinate them with state propaganda versus love and support from family and friends in the community, now you start to become the authority in that student's life.
So we've talked about some of the real reasons why the compulsory education system was set up, but what were the official reasons being given by proponents of this system? Well,
the official reasons is to create good citizens, and that's from the state perspective, is that you want, and it's a good argument, right? You want to have good citizens who have manners and respect, and they can be part of the community, part of the society. They can vote, and this is one component of it, the good citizens. And then you have kind of the religious perspective, is good people. You want to have people who are moral and will behave in a good way in terms of God and community. And this is how they sold it, was that you can be good citizens, you can be good people, and why not? But when they started forcing the kids to come to school, the parents knew something was fishy about it, and they didn't ultimately end up desiring that. But when the family's threatened with force, then that's what they're able to do. So it's a nice way to get the story across, is to say what everybody wants, right? We all want people to have good morals. We all want people to have good citizenry habits and behavior. So if you can promote it that way and say, this is the way, this is the means to achieving that end, then you'll get some people who are like, let's do that. So these utopians and social engineers have taken advantage of people's general trust towards no other people. And so when people say something, they end up just trusting them. And it's hard to really bring up for many people about the school system. So this is why we're trying to get creative to get out the message in any way we can, that there are people who want to take advantage of you and your humanity, and they do view you as a resource. They don't view you as a being or a spirit or something great and magnificent, but just a resource to be used, just a means to their corporate end or a means to their governmental end. And they sold it as being a good person and good citizen. So we're going to force your kids to go to school. But there was some odor in the air, some festering kind of intuition that many parents had, that they didn't want to do it, but they had the law going against them. So they're in between a rock and a hard place to save their kids from the tough place that they're in. That I guess we have to let the state take our kids, and they're going to forcibly take our kids to make them good citizens, which contradicts the whole model of forcing people. It's not a very moral thing to do. Right. So one more question before we move on and look more deeply at how the current system hurts students and hurts children. But you briefly mentioned John Dewey in passing earlier in our conversation. Can you talk a little bit about who John Dewey was and what role he and the progressive era as a whole played in helping to develop the American public school system and get us to where we are today? Yeah, John Dewey was an academic, and he also came from Columbia's Teacher College. But yeah, just a socialist type mind. He even said that education is not preparing you for future life, but it's a social experience to create you for a social community. And so rather than it being to manifest your potential and be able to express yourself, create a livelihood for yourself, he said no, it's to synthesize and be together with a social organization. And also, he said that the teachers are the priests of the new coming society. And this is in his pedagogical creed, where just kind of a radical thinking individual who would go on and teach other teachers. So he is part of the key person to get the academic ideas out there, and even expressing the need for like a planetary type government where the state is the supreme and the all controlling entity, and rather than be independent and unique, he was promoting conformity and being able to fit into this social apparatus, which on a surface level it sounds really nice, but when you start to implement some of the policies which are setting standards, and this is the beginning of the curriculum, and this is how we rank people and evaluate the quality of your mind, and then we put you on a scale. There's a bell curve, and we tell you who you should associate with. It's centralized planning, and he was one of the key voices for that, promoting what ultimately is un-American and very disrespectful.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast.
If you would like to listen to more episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes, or subscribe on Stitcher, and check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also email us at contact@wakeupcallpodcast.com if you're interested in being interviewed for the show or have any other suggestions.
Thank you.